Chronicles of a Cast Member, Volume 3, Treasure Island. Hello, dear listeners. Back again? Or perhaps you're a new soul delving into my eerie cast member chronicles. I've stumbled upon many mysteries while working here at Disney World. After sharing my experience in the underground tunnels in the Haunted Mansion, today I bring you the darkest tale I've told so far. My night at Treasure Island. For those who don't already know, Treasure Island was a Disney attraction that opened in Bay Lake, right next to Magic Kingdom in the 70s. It went through a few different name changes, finally landing on Discovery Island and keeping that name until it mysteriously closed in 1999. Disney claimed that it was because of maintenance costs, but guests and cast members have long been theorizing about the real reason it closed. The night we went, the water was calm as we rowed across Bay Lake, the soft lapping of the waves against the boat occasionally interrupted by our conversation. I was kayaking across the lake in a group of 4, Tess, Marco, Jake, and myself. I still don't know why they changed the name. Treasure Island is so much cooler, remarked Tess, her hand skimming the water's surface. Marco chuckled. Marketing, but yeah, most still call it Treasure Island. Plus, it helps to differentiate it from Discovery Island and Animal Kingdom. Jake, a coworker I'd only known in passing, adjusted his cap. I remember coming here as a kid. The wildlife, the walkways, it was cool. Kind of boring, though. The shadow of the island grew larger, and I felt a flutter of excitement and unease. This was my first time visiting at all, as I hadn't been lucky enough to go to Disney World before Discovery Island had already been closed to the public. Have you guys been here at night before? I asked. Tess and Marco exchanged a glance. Once or twice, but it feels different each visit, Tess whispered, her voice trailing off. As our kayaks gently scraped the pebbled shore of the island, the first thing that struck me was the damp, earthy smell of decay, a blend of rotting leaves and forgotten memories. The island looked like a relic of another time. Forgotten structures, now cloaked in moss and overgrowth, peeked out from the dense vegetation, standing as silent testimonies to the island's past. The fog was thick, almost palpable, wrapping around us like a cold, wet blanket. It muffled sounds and obscured the moonlight, casting the island in a hazy silver glow. Every rustle in the underbrush and every distant animal cry seemed amplified, echoing eerily through the fog. Tess stepped out of her kayak, her shoes sinking slightly into the spongy, moist ground. Dewdrops clung to her bouncy, curly hair as she glanced around, her expression a mix of nostalgia and unease. It's so much more overgrown than I remember, she murmured. Marco, pulling his kayak onto the shore, nodded in agreement. Nature reclaims quickly. He looked around, taking in the thick foliage and tall trees whose canopies disappeared into the fog. But you can still see where the path starts. Jake, seeming more alert than before, took a deep breath. Cool. As we ventured further in, the veil of mist grew thicker, its chilly fingers brushing against our faces. The once clear outlines of the pathways, now overgrown with ferns and brambles, beckoned us forward. In this spectral landscape, each step felt like a journey back in time. Every silhouette of the rusting remnants of old structures painted vivid pictures of the island's former life. The once crowded walkways, the echoes of laughter and excitement, now replaced with the haunting serenity of nature reclaiming its domain. We delved deeper, the sounds of Bay Lake faded, leaving us enveloped in the island's quiet embrace. Well, except for Jake. I wasn't sure what had gotten into him, but he seemed overly lively as we walked down the path, climbing on things and tearing down loads of vines and overgrowth with the help of his pocket knife. It helped clear the path a bit, which was nice, but I just wished he could have done so more quietly. Marco shot Jake an annoyed glance. Easy, Tarzan. We don't want to alert the entire island of our presence. Jake just grinned in response, his energy almost manic. Come on, there's no one here but us. Might as well have a little fun, right? Tess, ever the peacemaker, gave a small chuckle. Just don't get too carried away. We don't want to damage anything or get hurt. I couldn't help but agree with Tess. Jake's sudden surge of energy was unsettling, given the setting. Perhaps it was the exhilaration of being on a forbidden island, or maybe it was something about the island itself that was affecting him. Whatever it was, I was on high alert. We continued on, the winding paths taking us past abandoned bird cages, remnants of animal enclosures, and various dilapidated structures. Moss-covered signs, some barely legible, hinted at what the areas once were. As I tried to decipher one, I could barely make out the word show on it. Marco shined his flashlight around, revealing faded murals of vibrant tropical birds, now peeling and decayed with time. This place must have been amazing in its prime, he mused. Tess nodded, running her fingers along a wooden railing, its paint chipped and weathered. I remember the bird shows. They were so lively. The colors, the sounds, it was enchanting. I was about to comment when a sudden rustling caught my attention. My eyes darted to Jake, who was outside the structure, digging into the ground with his hands. His movements seemed erratic, almost frenzied. "Jake, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. He didn't respond immediately, continuing his digging. When he finally looked up, dirt smeared across his face. His eyes were wide and unfocused. "There's something here," he muttered, almost in a trance. Marco approached him, attempting to pull him away gently. "Come on, man." As Marco tugged on Jake's arm, Jake jerked away violently, shooting a furious glare at him. "It's mine, Marco. You can't have it," and went back to furiously digging away at the ground. At this point, Tess knelt down and calmly whispered, "Jake, there's nothing there. It's not safe to be digging in the ground." Jake slowly stopped digging, looking down at his hands with a confused expression. He shook his head a bit, blinking hard as he stood up. "Sorry," he muttered. He didn't make eye contact with any of us as we moved forward on the path. Marco and Tess tried to make small talk with everyone as we headed further down the winding trail, but Jake stayed silent. I noticed Jake becoming more fidgety, sweat beading on his forehead. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his breathing a bit erratic. Suddenly, he whipped around to face Marco and Tess. "Would you two stop it?" he snapped. Both looked startled. "Stop what?" Tess replied, her voice soft and concerned. Jake's face was contorted with frustration. "The whispering. I can hear you, you know. Whispering my name. Just say what you want to say." Tess's eyes widened in alarm. "Jake, we haven't whispered a thing. You've been with us the whole time." But Jake's agitation was palpable. "I can hear it, clear as day, always murmuring my name." Tess gently placed a hand on Jake's arm, trying to ground him. "Jake, no one's whispering about you." "Let's just get back to the kayaks," Marco suggested, his voice low. Jake nodded, the back of his hand wiping a smear of dirt across his sweaty forehead. We were all uncomfortable at this point, and it wasn't just because of the Florida heat. As we retraced our steps, a heavy, oppressive atmosphere settled over us. The mist, the unknown elements of the island, and now Jake's unsettling behavior were a bubbling cauldron of anxiety. Jake's breathing grew more ragged with every step. His eyes darted about, seemingly latching onto some distant, unseen point. He began to mumble to himself, his voice just a hair's breadth above a whisper, almost as if he were conversing with someone, or something, only he could perceive. Suddenly, Jake, his face a mask of determination and alarm, whispered rapidly, "It's calling me." Without warning, he bolted into the brush. His athletic frame easily navigated the dense undergrowth, and within moments, he was swallowed up by the fog and the trees. "Jake!" Tess cried out, her voice edged with panic. Marco started after him, but the thick vegetation and the dense fog quickly hindered his progress. "We can't lose each other," he shouted back, his voice filled with urgency. But Jake had disappeared. We searched the island for over an hour before we decided to head back to where our phones could get signal and we could call for help. But on the way back to the kayaks, Jake came darting down the path toward us, a wide smile on his face. In his hand, he clutched a shiny golden coin, gleaming even in the dim light. The edges were ornate, and the face of the coin bore an emblem none of us recognized. His fingers were caked with dirt, mixed with blood. "Look!" Jake exclaimed, his voice a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion. Tess gasped, reaching out but hesitating. "Jake, your hands!" Jake's eyes, previously filled with joy, shifted, a shadow passing over them. He cradled the coin close to his chest, looking into the dense brush behind us. That's when I heard it, a low growl emanating from the darkness. A chill ran down my spine, but I saw nothing in the direction of the sound. Jake's face went white. "It's here," he whispered, terror evident in his voice. Before any of us could question him further, something in the vegetation caught his attention. His eyes widened in horror, staring at something only he could see. With a blood-curdling scream, Jake fell back, clutching the coin even tighter. But the terror in his eyes quickly morphed into anger. He scrambled to his feet, glaring at all of us with a wild look. "You want it, don't you?" he spat out, clutching the coin as if it were his lifeline. "You want to steal it from me?" Marco stepped forward, hands raised in a pacifying gesture. "Jake, calm down. No one's after your coin." But Jake was beyond reasoning. In one swift motion, he lunged at Marco, wild-eyed and with an intent to harm. Marco barely dodged out of the way. Tess shrieked, "What's your problem, Jake? Leave Marco alone." It was at this point that Jake, seemingly in a daze, reached into his pocket and flicked open his knife. "Run!" I yelled, and we did just that. We sprinted through the tangled underbrush, Jake's enraged shouts echoing behind us. The kayaks seemed miles away, but with adrenaline pumping through our veins, we reached them in what felt like mere moments. I could hear Jake's footsteps closing in. Without waiting, we shoved the kayaks into the water, not daring to glance back. As we paddled away with all our might, the silhouette of Jake grew smaller on the shore. Marco tried to reassure me and Tess, reminding us that Jake has his kayak and could leave whenever he cooled down. But Marco hadn't heard anything when we were on the path, and when I tried to mention it later, both he and Tess looked at me with the same concerned expressions that they had given Jake that night, so I just dropped it. Jake never came back to work. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but according to his roommate, Jake's stuff just disappeared from their apartment one day. I tried to tell myself that Jake had had a weird episode or something that day, and that he was too embarrassed to say goodbye in person. But every now and then, when I pass Bay Lake, I swear I can hear his voice whispering my name. And so, dear listeners, I conclude yet another chapter of the Cast Member Chronicles. What lingers on that island, waiting beneath the veil of mist and decay, remains a mystery. Perhaps it's the whispers of the past, or maybe something far more insidious. Each tale I share is but a reminder that places of wonder and joy can sometimes hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. Sleep well, and join me next time as I unravel more of my spooky experiences here at the happiest place on Earth. Remember, all that glitters is not gold, and not every treasure is meant to be found. Sweet dreams.